NXT is a developmental brand for WWE. I think most wrestling fans know that, but I wanted to start off getting that out in the open because I have brought this topic up on other forums and people didn't get it.
What?
So yes, the WWE has NXT. AEW had been using AEW Dark as kind of a quasi-developmental program, but since the purchase of Ring of Honor, apparently intend to use that as developmental. Impact, well, I think they had a deal with Ohio Valley Wrestling for a little while, but who knows? I'm surprised they're still in business. The point being, there are developmental brands and programs being used by what are recognized as major pro wrestling promotions. But I think it could be better with a territory-style system that is not necessarily used just as developmental. Now, while this idea could be for any promotion, I'm going to center this on WWE. All the other promotions mentioned kind of work together, plus the NWA and other promotions are in the mix. WWE is still on top of the heap, and the one that I think can most benefit from a territory-style system. It wouldn't have worked when Vince McMahon was there because he micromanaged things too much, and this kind of relies on delegating power. But with a new beginning in the WWE this past year, I think it could work. So, hear me out. You have the main roster for WWE on both Raw and SmackDown. That's everybody's main goal, the major leagues, if you will. Then you have the developmental brand with NXT. You can still have NXT. I'm not saying you have to get rid of it. It would either officially be a third brand with Raw and SmackDown, like they strongly hinted at a couple of years ago, and at times even referred to it as the third brand, or you could make it the upper tier of developmental, the last stop on the road to the main roster. I'm also not saying you would have to recreate all of the territories. Just have 3 hubs in key places. For the purpose of this video, let's have WWE Dallas, WWE St. Louis, and WWE Atlanta. These are cities with a long pro wrestling history, and the WWE always draws good crowds when they have shows there. They're also far enough apart from each other there shouldn't be any problems, and the surrounding areas are big enough to work as their own promotion. Basically, these hubs would run like the old territories, with weekly house shows, local television, and spot shows within a reasonable driving distance. Now, since the definition of a house show has kind of changed since the territory days, let me elaborate just a little. A house show was a card in a city a promotion would run on a regular basis, usually the same building. House shows were usually either every week or every other week. In most cases, these were not televised, but there were exceptions like World Class Wrestling, who had house shows in both Fort Worth and Dallas. There were also their weekly television tapings. Spot shows were the smaller shows territories ran in smaller cities and towns and were usually sponsored by the local JC's chapter, the High School Football Booster Club, or some other local organization. These were usually cards with only 4 or 5 matches held in high school gyms, VFW halls, rodeo arenas, or any other place they could fit the ring in up to about 500 people, or maybe more. While these WWE territories would obviously have some financial backing to get started, the hope and the goal would be that they could be self-financed. The money they would bring in from local advertising, house shows, and spot shows would run the territory. Obviously, you would have to have someone running the show on a local level. I have no idea if these people would be interested in even doing it, but I'm going to throw out some names. How about Michael Hayes to run the WWE Dallas territory? Hayes' most successful run came in World Class Wrestling, and his name could certainly capture someone's attention. For St. Louis, maybe Dutch Mantel could be brought back into the company. Dutch is certainly a product of the territory days, and I think he could help bring a product that would go over well in that area. And for Atlanta, how about Mike Rotundo, back where he caught a lot of people's attention in the 1980s? Honestly, these all may not be the best choices, and WWE might not want Hayes to leave his current positions in the company, but I'm just putting the names out there. Instead of writers, Hayes, Mantel, and Rotundo would be in charge of booking, which is what you were supposed to have in wrestling. Booking. A creative team would be okay, with each one choosing 2 or 3 people to bounce things off of, and you would need a good director for television and things like vignettes. And most important, they would direct the wrestlers to have a stronger voice in their own gimmick. And keep in mind that creative wanted to name Stone Cold Steve Austin Chili McFreeze and The Undertaker Booger Red. Sometimes the wrestlers themselves know what is best for them. Now, I'm not saying completely take off the leash, but give wrestlers more creative control and let them learn. A good example, it took Ric Flair years to become the nature boy we all know today, and it was his own creation. Okay, so what's the point? It probably sounds like some old man wishing it was still the 1970s and 80s. Well, in wrestling, yeah, a little bit. But the actual point is to let people coming into pro wrestling learn how to work, not just be superstars who put more thought and effort into their entrance to the ring than they do what happens in the ring. What is the last generation of wrestlers that are truly considered legendary? The ones that will still get a deafening pop when they walk out even though they haven't had a match in years. The wrestlers for the Attitude Era. Steve Austin, The Rock, Mick Foley, The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Kane. These also happen to be the last generation of wrestlers that came from the territory days. And that's not just a coincidence. Now, sure, you have an exception to the rule in Goldberg, but that's a special case. For all the things WCW screwed up, they did Goldberg right, until Vince Russo got a hold of him. For the most part, wrestlers who shot to fame in the late 90s did so because they cut their teeth in the territories instead of being processed through a plant. There wasn't a trainer in charge of a room full of people. Each of these wrestlers I mentioned were trained by wrestlers who had their own success and took responsibility for a wrestler the rest of his career. It was more than just going through moves. Spot shows were also really important to the development of a wrestler. Nobody went 100 miles an hour at spot shows. There was rarely blood or anything like that, and wrestlers could try things you didn't necessarily want to try on live TV. They were almost like a training session in front of a live crowd without the unforgiving eye of television cameras. Wrestlers learned how to actually work at spot shows. Plus, it helped to keep the audience interested, as it was largely smaller towns and crowds that wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to go to house shows or TV tapings. Now, some people might say, isn't that what the Indys do? Well, sort of, but they don't have the benefit of the wrestlers that have already made it making special appearances or the financial backing of major promotions like WWE. Plus, having that brand catches someone's attention. And as I referenced earlier, it wouldn't just be a developmental program. How many times over the years have we seen a wrestler be released and the reason given is creative doesn't have anything for them? If WWE has someone that they have painted themselves into a corner with, instead of letting them sit on the shelf or outright releasing them, they can send them to Dallas or St. Louis or Atlanta. Of course, with these wrestlers that are already on the main roster, they could be given the option of being released so they can move on to another promotion, or be sent to one of the WWE territories to keep the possibility open for them to come back later. Now, I do hesitate to say this, but it could also give a place for wrestlers who are, let's just say, less aesthetically pleasing, a place to prove their worth. I don't think it's much of a secret that many people in the WWE were helped greatly with their position because they caught people's eye outside of the ring. Not to take anything away from those who also excelled in it. There are wrestlers with a lot of talent that simply don't fit the bill as a model or a pinup. Some of them might even be good with staying in the territory and never making the main roster. Others might be given the chance they wouldn't get otherwise with a WWE eye on them. Territories could also give the WWE a chance to do something different with their titles. A lot of people have called for having one top champion, but instead of unifying titles, the WWE champion could defend on both Raw and SmackDown. Meanwhile, the Universal champion could travel occasionally to the territories to defend the title, as well as Raw, SmackDown, and even NXT. You could do that for both the men and the women. The only problem I can think of would be the wrestlers' pay. For the people who are new and are actually in development, they could be paid like the territory days, and pay is based on how much the house brought in. For wrestlers that have already been on a main roster and have their guaranteed contracts, it does cause something of a problem. WWE rightly wouldn't want to keep someone on a big contract to be wrestling exclusively in St. Louis, for example. So some adjustments would have to be made. But that's also where the option of being sent down, for lack of a better phrase, or taking an outright release would help. And let the wrestler decide for themselves if they want to move on or stay with the company for less money. I don't know, maybe there are a dozen things I'm not taking into consideration and I am just an old man longing for the old days. Maybe it wouldn't even work with today's wrestlers who grew up dreaming of being a sports entertainment superstar and not a professional wrestler. But I'd like to see someone try it. And if it's going to happen, it needs to happen fast. because the wrestlers who knew how to do it best from first-hand experience are starting to fade away. We're already to a point that old school, to a lot of people, is in fact the Attitude Era. For what it's worth, that's my idea. Rebuild a system that worked for almost 100 years with a sense of irony that it could happen within a company that essentially tore it down. Why do I care? I don't even know. Maybe that's another video.